Hello, everyone, and welcome to TheGrill Focus on Streaming presented by FilmRise. My name is Sharon Waxman. I'm the founder and the editor-in-chief of TheWrap, and I'm excited to welcome you to this special event. The pandemic has produced a great deal of disruption, as we all know, and it has vastly accelerated all kinds of streaming. With theaters shut down, online video subscriptions have escalated 26% in the last year to 1.1 billion subscribers, according to a report by the Motion Picture Association of America. Meanwhile, global consumer spending on home entertainment has increased 23% to $69 billion thanks to online viewing. But in such a crowded marketplace, with everyone racing to grab your attention and streamers grappling to acquire or be acquired, what's at stake here for the future of the entertainment industry? So to dive into this today, we will hear the perspectives of producers, content providers, and platform executives, including the CMO of Discovery Plus, Pato Spagnoletto, the CEO of Entertainment Studios, Byron Allen, the CEO of Laugh Out Loud, Jeff Clanagan, Roku's VP of Programming, Rob Holmes, and RuPaul's Drag Race executive producer, Fenton Bailey. The Grill series is part of our WrapPRO community, our subscription-based service for industry insiders. Pro is the essential news source designed specifically for those who want to stay on top of the business in movies, TV, streaming, and it includes exclusive access, news, and insights that are just not available anywhere else. So for more information and to try WrapPRO for free, visit TheWrap.com/join. And throughout the event today, we invite you to share your thoughts on social media with the hashtag TheGrill, and you can follow us at TheWrap and on our Facebook page. You can also go back and rewatch today's conversations on demand at TheWrap.com/streaming-TheGrill. So to kick things off today, I'm excited to be chatting with Danny Fisher, the co-founder and the CEO of FilmRise, the largest third-party provider of content to streaming platforms today. With over 40,000 hours of content in its library, FilmRise clients include Amazon Prime, Peacock, IMDb TV, Roku, and others. Today, Danny's going to be sharing his insights and his research as they pertain to emerging industry trends and audience demand and the future of streaming and the story of FilmRise itself, which is fascinating. Let's have a quick look at FilmRise.
Oh my God! I'm gorgeous! There is no sushi on the menu!
And welcome, Danny.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation.
Yeah, well, it's really going to be interesting to delve into this because we're so used to thinking about Netflix and talking about Disney Plus, but you know, there's a really interesting marketplace that you've developed with FilmRise. Tell us what that is and how it's grown.
Right. So I think FilmRise is a unique company, and I think what differentiates it from other companies that are providing content, especially to the AVOD universe, is that we're data analytics driven, and everything we do is about the data analytics. And I could just say that if I could talk about the beginning of FilmRise. Kind of began for me in 2012 when I filed for personal bankruptcy and wondering what I was going to do next, drive a cab or like that. And
well, let's back up for our viewers. Why'd you go bankrupt? What happened there?
I went bankrupt because in the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, I had a substantial, production company called City Lights Media Group, and we just kind of got hit by the by the Great Recession. I had tens of millions of dollars in corporate debt, personally guaranteed by me, so I had to file for personal bankruptcy.
Wow.
And so with $1,700 to my name initially, I was thinking, okay, so I drive a cab or something. But then I was thinking, back in high school, I was considered the highest ranked math student in New York City. And I never did anything with math, but I was just wondering, gee, is there a way for me to combine, my former skills in math with, streaming, with, film and television media, and I came up with a thesis, and the thesis was, if I could figure out and analyze and create a data analytics sort of algorithm to figure out what consumers want to see, irrespective of what the industry thinks people want to see, I can essentially acquire undervalued, underappreciated content. And if I could do that, I can build a successful business. And actually, that initial data analytics, it served us in 2012. It serves us today. Today, it's much more refined. It has machine learning and automation and all that.
Are you saying you personally built the algorithm, or you hired?
No, I personally built it. But of course, it was started myself in a napkin and then some spreadsheets. But I mean, it was pretty pretty basic. Now it's much more refined. But that's what drives the FilmRise model. It especially is applicable to the AVOD space, because in the AVOD space,
we'll just call it everybody watching probably knows what AVOD is, but just in case, it's advertising supported video on demand.
Right. Yeah, that's right. In the internet base, as opposed to the old broadcast. Essentially, it's the old broadcast model, except that it's in the internet. The thing that's interesting about the AVOD space is that I see the AVOD universe as a universe where the consumer is the programmer. So take a look at theatrical, take a look at cable, take a look at the Netflixes, SVOD, Discovery, Disney Plus, etc. And in all those areas, the studio, the platform, essentially creates and directs and guides the viewer to what they want to see. Netflix decides to make The Crown, and Disney Plus is Mandalorian, etc. And the marketing spend and the surfacing. In the AVOD space, it's very different. It's I call it the AVOD. The consumer is the programmer, because it's largely a revenue share based, usage based, kind of economic model, which is a model that we prefer at FilmRise. And so what happens is that there's a lot of experimentation. The AVOD user does not need to give a credit card, does not need to pay, does not give his or her name, does not need to log in. And so basically there's a lot of experimentation. They can try different platforms for free. And even within a platform, they can say, hey, you know what? I've never heard of this content, but you know what? It's free. Let me give it a try. And so there's a lot more of experimentation. And so what happens in the AVOD world, again, the consumer programs it, because what happens is the AVOD platform, which of course I'm in touch with, on a daily, weekly basis, the AVOD platforms, they have machine learning, algorithms on their end, and the AVOD platforms surface content that people are watching. So if people are watching, a piece of content that they didn't think anything of, but a lot of people are watching it, they surface that, and that's what they lean on. So it's a different.
So let's back up a little bit, because when from the reel that we showed at the beginning of the conversation before we started, it's a kind of crazy patchwork in a way of different kinds of content that you're surfacing. You've got everything from vintage television in The Rifleman to comedies from the 80s to like a Scandinavian crime noir kind of thing. It feels very, it doesn't feel like it's speaking to one audience. So how does that work? Because you're not feeding a specific audience, it feels like.
It's true, but we've discovered a number of things. While it doesn't speak necessarily to a specific audience, we found in the AVOD world, like we introduced Midsummer Murders to the AVOD universe. Midsummer Murders was, PBS masterpiece, but really associated with, more of the SVOD, television, broadcast experience. And we introduced that to the AVOD.
Well, Midsummer. Well, tell us what that's about. That's a crime. It's a noir series.
Midsummer Murder is a British murder series.
Murder series.
That's on 22 seasons long. And we introduced it first to the Roku channel. And, it took about a month or two, initial response was, the audience is kind of soft, and just said, hey, our analytics showed that it was going to be super high demand. And after a couple of months, it became our top show.
On Roku.
Yeah, on the Roku channel and several others. You mentioned Rifleman, which is really interesting because, again, we like surfacing, not only undervalued, but content that nobody's ever heard of. And the platforms by themselves, no one's licensing the Rifleman,
but that's a great example. So take us deeper beneath the surface around, like, what did you identify? What did your algorithm identify about a completely obscure black and white television series from the 1960s?
Yeah, what I identified is that there were more people who wanted to see the Rifleman than some of the originals on Netflix, some of the originals on Amazon Prime. It was just through the roof. And
but how would you even know that? It's not even it's nowhere in the public consciousness.
Oh, it's in our. We use 31 metrics to evaluate our data analytics. We look at various things. That is sort of our secret sauce, but we look at consumer demand from many different perspectives.
But are you looking for a Western, like an old Western, or are you looking for a specific show? Because it could have been Gunsmoke, or it could have been something else, right?
No. Shows come to us and we analyze them, and we say, okay, here's a Rifleman comes to us. It could be another Western comes to us and say, you know what, nobody wants to see this. Rifleman came to us, and it came as a super high demand content.
I see. Okay, they came to you with the show. Got it.
Right. And the relationship we have with our AVOD platforms, the major ones and the minor ones too. But the relationship we have is when we say, look, this is going to work. They take our word for it because we've done it over and over and over again.
Yes.
Surface content that's just, exploded. And I'll give you the most recent case is this year we acquired, a couple of months ago, we acquired Heartland, a Canadian drama series. Some people have heard of, but essentially it's under the radar. It's not like people talking about it like The Office or Schitt's Creek or anything. And our analytics showed us ahead of Schitt's Creek. It showed us ahead of like the top content. And in fact,
is that metric like desire to see, or curiosity, or desire to see?
Desire to see, the desire to watch. We measure desire to watch, and our algorithm is sophisticated enough to basically see we can predict streaming hours on various platforms. So we know to do so many hours on the Roku channel, so many on Pluto TV, so much on IMDb TV, and so we can actually, it helps us with our pricing. And we knew, basically, it's like, when we bought it, I was saying, well, this is be our number one show, and no question about it. And several weeks in, we're in release several weeks, and it's it's already our number one show on a couple of major platforms, and it's heading to a number one show on the other platforms. And the thing that's beautiful about what we do on the analytics side is there was no question about it. In my mind, there was no question about it. It was going to be our number one show. For the platform side, it involved us. Letting the platforms know, hey, this could be a number one show, and they go, okay, we'll believe that, and we've developed credibility with the platforms. When we say something is really going to work, it really does work, and now it's a top show.
Well, so fascinating. So talk a little bit about the advertising model versus the subscription model. Because I'm going to guess that you probably feel like you don't get enough respect in the industry. You have a big business, and everybody talks about the subscription-based platforms, Netflix, Disney Plus. But Hulu, of course, has an advertising-based model. And, I suspect that other streaming services that don't have advertising are probably going to start introducing that. Why do you think that the advertising streaming model has been less in the spotlight, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a puzzlement to me. I've been talking about AVOD for 5 years. I've been talking to initially when we needed investors, 5 years ago, and people looked at me like I was insane. They just AVOD. Everybody's talking about SVOD, SVOD, SVOD. And I think SVOD is kind of like the glitzier, the sexier. It's like the big TV releases, the big productions. AVOD, there's so much room to grow. First of all, it's exploded in the last 3 years. There's a lot of room to grow, especially internationally.
Yeah.
But I tell you, Sharon, I'll make a distinction between the Hulu model and, sort of the Roku channel, model, because I think it's one thing. See, Hulu, you still have to pay for. And so I really make a distinction because there's an economic distinction. And I think there's an underserved audience, and there's tens of millions, if not more, of people in the United States who cannot afford multiple subscriptions, and maybe who cannot afford a single subscription or choose not to have any subscriptions, any paid subscriptions. We certainly know a lot. Identified a lot of.
Is that an older audience? Is that a more ethnic? Is that sort of a lower socioeconomic group? Like, who is that?
I think the one thing in common generally, it's a lower socioeconomic group, but the lower socioeconomic group is a very large group.
Yes,
it's not older versus
we know
young.
that.
Yeah, it's for example, Tubi has is known to have a younger group than some of the other platforms. So it's definitely a lower socioeconomic group, but that's a lot of people. But the distinction it's important to make between the Hulu's, the world, and maybe HBO Max is talking about putting ads and stuff. It's still. The difference is that in the pure AVOD experience, it's completely free, no names asked, no credit cards asked, and that means so many people can just, I interact with people on a daily basis. People send me emails, about our content. They ask me, "Oh, when is this going to come back on? The next season coming back on and everything?" And I hear from them, and they say, these are not just cord cutters; they're cord nevers. Some of these people saying,
right,
I would never pay for anything. Basically, I'm in it for free. And it's a very sizable audience. I think it's a neglected audience. And again, there's so much experimentation involved. And so I think it's what's
the distinction you're drawing with, say, Hulu, for example?
The distinction is with Hulu, you have to pay something. With the Roku channel, you don't have to pay anything. With Pluto TV, you don't have to pay anything. With IMDb TV,
but doesn't Hulu have a totally free version?
It used to, but I don't believe it had.
They don't anymore. I do know they used to, but I'm not that big a Hulu watcher.
They stopped that. You can double check, but they stopped that. 3 or 5 years ago. So a completely free model. You limit it to kind of the Roku channel, Pluto TV, Tubi, and IMDb TV.
Well, I mean, obviously, media companies that have acquired all of these companies, Tubi and Pluto, have been acquired in the last 12 to 18 months. They do recognize that there is a big opportunity, which is the thing that you're talking about.
Absolutely, they recognize an opportunity. In the case of Pluto, TV, they can bring in the Viacom. In the case of Tubi, they can bring in the Fox.
Right.
I mentioned that. While our core business is business to business, B2B, we have developed our own free service, the FilmRise streaming network, which is actually the largest independent streaming service. So after you get through Tubi, Pluto, the Roku channel, and IMDb TV, as far as I know, FilmRise is the largest independent, AVOD service. After that. And we're certainly not as large as Pluto, Tubi, but we're fast growing. We're heading towards, by the end of this year, 10 million monthly active users, and we also learn.
Give us some sense of how you've grown over the past. Well, I presume the pandemic has been a growth period for you. So give us some sense of what the scale of that has been. I'd say roughly we've doubled year over year in terms of traffic and revenues and ad impressions. Wow. We're doing 250 million ad impressions per month, which is nowhere near. I kind of feel like we're at where Pluto, Tubi, where the big ones were maybe 3 years ago, which of course we're behind, but it was always that was not the primary business we have. It was, sort of a secondary business to kind of experiment. That's grown. We're planning over the next, year or two and beyond
really lean into that direct-to-consumer experience and grow that end of it.
That means you have to have you have to staff up for that. You have to have an ad sales staff and all of that. It is kind of a different business, right?
It's a different business. We feel like we were early movers in it. We established the FilmRise streaming network, at least 5 years ago. Again, we didn't really take it seriously, I'd say, until like the last, honestly, since the last 5 months. I mean, since January 1st, we've just, rocket powered, the direct to consumer offering we have.
So how big is the company now? What are your annual revenues? What can you share about that?
I'd say our monthly revenues are 8 figures, and so our annual revenues are into the 9 figures, and we're highly profitable. And
so something north of $100 million a year you're doing.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. That feels like a very substantial business. So are you looking?
And we're not losing money. Not only we're not losing money, we're highly profitable. So
and you're highly profitable.
Yeah.
Well, that would make sense, because if you're licensing content, you're not spending on production in a way that
that's right.
The Netflixes are, and the Apples are, and the Amazons are.
Yeah.
That's an arms race that, man, you need a very, very big war chest for that.
Yeah. I mean, some people have looked at our company and said, well, how can we possibly generate these profits? And the reason is that sort of that arbitrage between what we value content, say like the Rifleman, versus what the industry values it, or what we value Heartland versus what the industry is. And it's a factor of so many times, because, again, we are looking at things. I think most people will look at a license based on, what does the industry kind of bid on this piece of content?
This kind of category.
Yeah, with this category, is this, and we don't look at that at all. We don't buy. Sometimes when we buy libraries, people show us like the cash flow for the last 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. We throw that out. We don't look at that. We don't care what people have made in the past, because we don't look at what money a piece of content has made. We don't care about that. What we look at is, do you, Sharon, do you want to watch this content? Do other people like you? We look at, what is the desire to see this content, and we come up along, we identify content that people really want to see, and we have for years been placing content. I love it when no one's heard of the content. Literally, no one's heard of our content, and say, what is this? And I love it that I get a daily printout of our top 300 movies and our top 300 TV shows. I get a daily printout. What I love about it is that most of the content we see in our top, no one's ever heard of. I've never even heard of it. I mean, because we don't.
Give us an example. What are your top 3 movies right now? Do you even know? I'm putting you on the spot. But
called The Handsome Cab, I think. Anybody ever hear of it?
No. Is that an animated? Is it an animated movie?
I don't know. It's our number 1 movie. Our number 1 TV series right now is Dr. Finley. Anybody ever heard of it?
No.
Okay. I'm talking to some platforms saying, hey, you want to take Dr. Finley? I was like, never heard of it. I say, well, you will hear about it soon. And so, I mean, overall, our number 1 series, and Dr. Finley, it's number 1 on one particular platform. But I'd say overall, Heartland is our top series: Heartland, Forensic Files, Unsolved Mysteries, Hell's Kitchen with Gordon Ramsay.
So give me your sense of kind of where you see streaming going, because what you're pointing out and what becomes clear as we're talking is that not only is there this huge arms race going on with the big streaming services, but there is just an even greater avalanche of content coming at the consumer from niche streaming services like yours or other AVOD platforms. What is going to happen? There's only so many hours in the day. There's only so many people who have 2 eyes in their head. How much can the market bear?
Well, look, Shannon, I think we're certainly seeing consolidation, and we're going to continue to see consolidation. And for us as a company, we certainly have headwinds. Prices for content are going up. People are becoming aware, the content is worth. And so for us, the competitive edge, the one thing we have that drives us unique is no matter what we have, we can always identify content that people are just have never heard of, or are not or is dramatically undervalued. So
But is that a good thing? I mean,
for us, it's a great thing.
I'm saying with the competition, I mean, everybody's trying to break through and say, and the way you do that normally is with a brand that's familiar to people, like Friends. That's why Friends is so valuable, because
Right.
you don't know what to watch on Netflix.
Friends is
You
valuable.
watch Friends.
But I'll give you a case. So Schitt's Creek is obviously super, super on everyone's mind. But if you could look at Nielsen, you'd see that Heartland is outstreaming Schitt's Creek. Okay, so I mean,
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? And fortunately, before we acquired it before Nielsen came out with ratings, and but we predicted that, and so it's all about that for us, is being able to predict, the Dr. Finleys of the world, which nobody's heard of, and that movie that I mentioned, I forget if it's called The Mystery of the Handsome Cab or something like that, that's what we do, and so. Yes, there'll be a lot of, there's going to be disruption. There's going to be consolidation. I have to concern myself, first and foremost, as CEO and founder of FilmRise, I have to concern myself as how do I navigate those headwinds? There's going to be walled gardens where, Disney Plus, you can't, break into it, in terms of licensing from them or licensing them and all that. And so really, the competitive edge that I'm really focused on is on the analytics, basically identifying content that nobody's going after, but they don't realize that it's such incredibly high value. And again, I can't tell you exactly what our 31 metrics are, but I guess I can give you. I'll just give you a taste of it, at the risk of now being sued by all my investors, but.
You don't want that to happen.
No, but I'll just give you one. Here's some content we're looking at. How many people are talking about it Twitter every 5 minutes? Okay.
Every 5 minutes?
I mean,
How many people are talking about the Rifleman on Twitter every 5 minutes? I mean, really, that's a metric?
I'm just giving you 1 out of 31.
Right. So that wouldn't apply to that.
A little taste of the secret sauce here.
Yeah.
As an example. So, so I'm looking outside the box. We don't look at Nielsen ratings. We don't look at what.
That's probably a good thing. Everyone I talk to in television says that the Nielsen ratings is some kind of shell game that somebody's going to eventually, pull back the curtain and say, there is no wizard.
Yeah, we don't look at Nielsen. We don't look at, again, what the licenses have been, this content has been licensed for $500 million for the last, we don't look at that. If we were going to buy Seinfeld, which I don't think we're buying, right? But if we were going to look at it, we wouldn't be looking at how much money it's made, or what we'd be looking at is, do people really want to see it? Do people want to see it more than something else? And obviously, in the case of Seinfeld and Friends, it's probably going to be pretty high. But believe it or not, it's not going to be that much higher. I mean, it'll obviously, it'll probably be higher than Heartland, but I don't know how much higher. Again, we now have data that shows Heartland, for example, being outstreaming, Schitt's Creek, which one.
So is there a point where you start producing content yourself?
Yeah, and that point is we now have 12 productions in the pipeline. We have about a half.
You do?
Yeah, we have a half a dozen already been produced or in post-production. And what we've done is kind of use the same analytics approach. It's a little different, because it's new content, but we're using analytics to drive what genre, what talent, we place in there. And we've developed a really interesting model. We think it's a fantastic model because we think it's completely unique, because what we do is the first series we produced was called Icons. We licensed it to PBS. The second series...
I've seen that.
Yeah. Oh, great. And the second series we produced was Bloodline Detectives, hosted by Nancy Grace. And so here's a case where, and the third series we produced is another true crime series, which we will probably soon be announcing a platform exclusive, which will be, licensing on a license fee. So the beauty of our production model is that we produce it with our own money. We don't need a commissioner. We don't need a Netflix or Hulu or a broadcast network to say, here's the money, here's. And so what we have is sort of we finish the production, or we're in post-production and we have a sizzle reel or a first episode rough cut. And then we could look at options. We can look at, well, do we go to AMC, Hulu, Netflix, look at a sort of a traditional license fee. And then if we don't like what we hear back, we have a digital syndication output deal essentially everywhere. So we could take that, and if we don't like what we see on a license fee basis, we can place it into hundreds of millions of, households by virtue of placing it on the Roku channel, Pluto TV, Tubi, and the FilmRise channels. So, and so we have a model where essentially we can assure distribution, we can assure monetization, we can pretty much assure, recouping and going into the black. And we really love that model. So we're planning to actually significantly ramp up production. We're focused on unscripted right now. We'll eventually go into scripted, but we're not competing against Netflix and those guys. We're not doing the crowd. We're doing unscripted, which is a lower cost, and we feel is a little more predictable in terms of outcome. You're choosing the right genre.
Are you looking to? I mean, as one of the few independent companies, is acquisition something that's on your mind? I mean, if I had to make a prediction, I'd say you'd be acquired by somebody in the next 24 months. Would feel to me with all the consolidation going on.
Yeah, I think it's a good conjecture. We certainly, I certainly get calls, and there's certainly interest out there, acquiring us. There's interest. I will leave it at that.
Very interesting. Well, Danny Fisher, thank you so much for joining us at our Grill event. It's been super fascinating, and you've built a really terrific company. Congratulations. That's a nice turnaround from bankruptcy, I'd say. So we look forward to hearing more from you, and good luck in your conversations about getting acquired. That's interesting.
Sure. And thank you, Sharon, so much. This was really fun doing this, and we will do this again soon. We can do it every week.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And a huge thank you to FilmRise for sponsoring this year's Grill Focus on Streaming. We do invite you to join our 2-day Grill event in September, the 29th and the 30th. For over a decade, the Wrap's Grill event series has led the conversation on the convergence between entertainment, media, and technology, bringing together newsmakers to debate the challenges and opportunities facing content in the digital age. The Grill provides thought leadership and substantive debate as part of the WrapPRO professional community in entertainment. For more information, visit thegrill.thewrap.com. And in the meantime, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned for our next panel, From Script to Streaming, Navigating the Changing State of Content Acquisition. That's coming up in just a few moments.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diane Haithman. I am the senior business reporter here at TheWrap. Welcome to the Grill event focused on streaming and presented by FilmRise. The panel is titled From Script to Streaming, Navigating the Changing State of Content Acquisition. And during this panel, I'll be speaking with leading producers and content providers to get a better understanding of what it takes to get your project made and streamed in 2021. Throughout the conversation, we invite you to share your thoughts on social media with us at the hashtag #TheGrill, and follow us at TheWrap and on our Facebook page. Now, without further ado, let's bring out our panelists. Let's start with Fenton Bailey, who is the executive producer of the Emmy Award-winning RuPaul's Drag Race and co-founder of the production company World of Wonder, aka WOW. Wow. After creating a substantial digital footprint with its YouTube channel, WOW Presents, WOW formed its own SVOD digital platform with WOW Presents Plus, the official streamer for all things drag, along with an award-winning blog, The WOW Report. Next, we have Jeff Clanagan. He is the CEO of Laugh Out Loud, Kevin Hart's global comedy brand and multi-platform network. Jeff is a longtime business partner of Kevin Hart's. Jeff also serves as president of Hart's media and technology company, Heartbeat Digital, which focuses on producing film, TV, digital content, and mobile gaming apps for distribution across all digital platforms and emerging technologies. Max Einhorn is the Senior Vice President, Acquisitions and Co-Productions at FilmRise. His content strategy has been instrumental in FilmRise becoming one of the largest and leading independent distributors in film and television streaming, cultivating a content portfolio with brands such as Unsolved Mysteries, Forensic Files, Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen, and a robust classic television offering which firepowers the company's many streaming partners in the SVOD and AVOD space and the FilmRise streaming network. Alexis Galfas is head of tracking at Cinetic Media. Her responsibilities include establishing relationships with emerging filmmakers, building Cinetic's film festival slates, assessing potential financial opportunities, and tracking film festival, market, and industry trends. Her recent projects that she's been involved with include RBG, Knock Down the House, Time, 1971, and a whole lot more. So welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate that. You know, we have been hearing so much about the consolidation of Hollywood and so much about streaming during the pandemic, and it as something that has fueled huge deals. You know, Amazon buys MGM, 8.45 billion. AT&T announces 43 billion merger with Warner Media to merge Warner Media with Discovery. And what gets lost in that, I think, and what we'd love to talk to you about is, what about the folks with projects who are developing things, need to sell them, want to find a home for them? Where do we go from here with all of these new changes? And I thought what I'd do is just kind of go around the room a little bit and have you talk about how, first sort of describe what your role in all of this is and how it's changed during this streaming boom that has happened during our ongoing, unfortunately, pandemic. Let's start with you, Fenton, if you don't mind.
Happy to be here. Yeah, I think the pandemic has seen a streaming boom, and absolutely you're right that it is the mega moves that seem to get all the headlines and attention. But I don't think that's the full story by any means. And I think that also, I mean, I think that the big ones, the huge ones, they're all in this race to be the biggest. And that's great for them. I'm not sure how great it is for viewers. And I don't think it's not something that's particularly of interest to us. I mean, with WrapPRO Plus, we really see ourselves in the specialty market. And I choose the word specialty as opposed to niche, because I think niche is often used as a word that's like small and insignificant, as opposed to specialty, which is perfectly sized and best suited to the environment that we live in. And I think perhaps that's the folly of the dinosaur type Amazons and these mega deals. They're all chasing being the biggest. But I'm not sure if you are the biggest, it doesn't mean content's better. It doesn't mean you're necessarily watching more. In fact, it seems we've seen this once before with all the networks and in cable. You know, the bigger they all get, the more you end up just getting more of the same. And so we see an opportunity really with WrapPRO Plus to and I'm borrowing here from the guy who runs LiveX Live. He says, you know, their mission is to overserve the underserved, and that's absolutely why we're here and what we're up to. And I think I think viewers want to find, you know, they seek authenticity not only in the content that they watch, but also in the way they seek it out. And discovering stuff for themselves is very much what they want to do, rather than being at the behest of McDonald's type corporations.
I see. Well, Alexis, you're at the top of my screen here, so let's jump over to you and have you talk a little bit about what this whole movement has meant to you.
It's been an incredible year in the sense that, you know, more people were home watching than ever. And I think it's been interesting from a sales perspective in that, you know, it is a little bit of an arms race between these bigger players. And I think, you know, one of the things that has been really, that I've been thinking more and more about is how do emerging filmmakers and people with new projects establish themselves within this, because really what we're seeing with these bigger streamers being so competitive is they're, constantly working with established filmmakers who have a track record, who they know can deliver a product. And I think the harder thing is newer filmmakers who are trying to get their foot in the door or have something that's new and unique and interesting, but they just don't have the track record around it. So I think one thing that's been interesting as we are in the marketplace more is really putting together a package that is compelling, whether that is through the story itself, if it's a documentary, the access they have, the film team, etc. So it's been interesting seeing how competitive it gets with these larger streamers, but it's also harder because if you don't sell to those handful of places, you really have to pivot and figure out an alternative, whether that's going completely independently or piecing it together through other means. But I think, I think Fenton is right in that, there are opportunities to build audiences and that aren't, that are specific and special. And it's just a matter of being that much smarter about how you release things and engage those audiences.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Jeff, let me jump down to you if you don't mind. How has streaming changed the way you do business and your world?
Well, I think that what happens is that, when you're looking at the media, you see a lot of news about the big players in the SVOD space. And just to define for listeners, you have SVOD and you have AVOD. AVOD being advertising video on demand or fast networks, which is what they call them now. We made a pivot about 2 years ago to move into the AVOD fast space. And that was probably the best decision I've made from a company standpoint, because that segment of streaming really blew up. What that means, though, for producers and filmmakers, what we're seeing is that when you saw those fast channels that were curated by Viacom, buying Pluto, Fox buying Tubi, Comcast launching Peacock, and obviously with the growth of the connected TV space, meaning Roku and Samsung, is now there's a whole nother market. And what has filled that market has been licensed content. And what's happened now is that all these players are now getting into the original content space. Even the connected TV players are getting into the content space. We just did the first deal with Roku, where they greenlit our first, and that was our first original production that they did with us, where they're moving into original production. So now there's a whole nother set of buyers out there. So you don't have to necessarily run to Netflix or Apple or HBO Max, because you now have Roku, you now have Pluto, you have Peacock, who are now starting to fund content. So from our standpoint, we saw it as a blue ocean in terms of opportunity. And when we made that pivot, it's like literally our business blew up during the pandemic, because we were operating in that whole AVOD fast channel network space. But I think for filmmakers, I think people are just catching on. But what you're going to see now is you're going to see the actual TV, connected TVs, like Roku is the first one in, but you're going to see Samsung, you're going to see Vizio, you're going to see LG actually start funding content, and they need content. So there's a really growing demand market for content in this other space. Right.
Well, we'll come back around to that, but let's jump over to Max. And what do you think? How has it changed your life in this overwhelming few months we've had the streaming?
Yeah, no, thank you. The evolution and the continued proliferation of streaming is an amazing thing. And if you're a network or a major studio, you're probably freaking out right now and have been over the past handful of years. But now you're trying to pivot your giant businesses in a whole new direction to keep up with consumer demand and what their new behaviors are, because they're the ones that are really driving. Consumers are the ones driving what content works and what streaming platforms are going to work. If you can believe this, Netflix started in 2007 in offering their streaming offerings, which seems like eons ago, but it really isn't. But if you contemplate the amount that has changed in that period, and the fact that we're now, in 2021, and last year, 2020, was the pandemic, think about all the competition that Netflix now has relative to where it was back in 2007. It has Disney, it has Viacom CBS, it has Discovery, which is merging with HBO Max, amongst other players. And the additional business model that has really proven to be viable over the past few years is ad-supported streaming, which is taking the place and will take the place, especially, considering Jeff's point about smart TVs getting into the market, is the adoption of free television into the digital space and making the over-the-air offering for consumers redundant. So what this all creates are a lot more buyers and competition for good content. It is, in fact, the seller's market. And I think if you are a producer and you are looking to get something out there, you need to familiarize yourself with who the buyers are. Sellers need to know who's buying content, who's producing content. FilmRise is involved in the independent. I still hear people asking every day, what is AVOD, what is valuable, and who are the players in it? So sellers really need to catch themselves up if they want to capitalize on this gold rush moment for new content. What I also think is important, this is coming off of Fenton's point, is to knowing about what the audience is for each platform, whether large or small, because a big platform has a lot more competition against others like Netflix and Discovery that will have broad audiences. I think you stand to succeed better if you really understand your specialty audiences and your niche audiences and what their needs are. And I don't even like to use the word niche, nor does Fenton. I actually think of those as verticals, right? Because it's about serving an audience, over-serving an audience that's underserved. Give them what they really want and what they're passionate about, and make it easy for them to find, and they will become loyal to you. There are people that have subscriptions to Netflix and slews of other platforms, but there are also people that will additionally subscribe to a World of Wonder, a Curiosity Stream, a BritBox, etc., because they're hyper serving what you're really interested in. We FilmRise, when we're buying content and what we're choosing what to invest in terms of production, we're really conscious about what the viable audience is for that content and where that audience is best served. If we're buying a television show, we're thinking about who's the audience for this, what platforms serve that audience, how they serve them, and what the monetization is going to look like. All that is informing our acquisitions.
I see. I'm hearing so much about certainly from this panel and just along the way about the AVOD space, and that there is a generation of viewers who aren't that bothered by ads, frankly. If they can find the content that they want, they really don't want to pay, premium price for 10 different services. One of the things about the siloing effect or the conglomeration is at least you're sort of paying one fee for a whole bunch of stuff as opposed to maybe 6 or 7. There's got to be a point at which, okay, I won't pay for any more. But the AVOD space is kind of great because it allows that sort of niche programming. And again, that younger audience perhaps that may not have the money but doesn't care that much. If they're able to get to what they want to see, they'll put up with an ad or two. So yeah, very interesting. One of the things I had a chance to speak with Alexis a little bit before this conversation is not only is it sort of confusing for audiences to figure out where do I go, where do I find my content, but certainly for the sellers as well, that the structure within the various entities of Netflix or whatever, is it the streaming executive? Is it the whole title of who does what has changed and has made it a little tougher for somebody to say, where do I go with my great content that I have to sell? Any comment on that? Anybody else get that sense, or any hints on navigating that, I guess, for those who are trying to sell something?
Yeah, here's what I think. One of the things is so I have to wear two hats. Is that we have our network, we have our studio. So our network is distributed across all these platforms. So obviously I'm talking to platforms all the time. If I was just a producer, it is really difficult to navigate. There's not like there's a streaming development executive or even an acquisition person in place. They're starting to staff up. But if you're on the outside and trying to figure out, well, who do I call? Sell to in this fast channel AVOD space, it is something that's evolving. It'll get there. I mean, what you saw with Roku went out and hired some development people, scripted and unscripted, acquisitions person. Everybody's kind of in the process of actually finding an executive. So what's happening? You're having the streaming executives are wearing a couple hats of acquisitions and production right now. So it is evolving in terms of the platform staffing up, and then from somebody on the outside knowing who do I call to pitch my content to.
Right. How many levels am I going to be going through here? Yeah. I mean, I think that I want to have other people weigh in on this as well, but I can't help but in my mind compare it a little bit to the fight between the Writers Guild and the agencies. It's like, hey, if you're doing everything, if you're acquiring and producing, et cetera, do you have too much control over content? You know, is that something that is a risk for all these wonderful specialty creators, if you will?
I think, you know, that a lot still remains to be seen. I mean, it's certainly going in that direction as more and more people, you know, companies consolidate. I think what's really interesting, and we've done a few deals where, you know, they're new to streaming, you know, whether it's Paramount Plus or Peacock, and sometimes as sellers, we're educating them a little bit on deal structure and how, you know, what, you know, the value is in the deal, and, you know, how long their exclusive terms are that should be standard, things like that. But, you know, to the point of like, who are the people to call, you know, it's interesting. A lot of these places are staffing up, but even established places like Netflix, they're reorganizing all the time. You know, they just reorganized now where there's a very clear divide between people in series and people on features. And when you're looking at docs in particular, features can sometimes be considered a two-parter. And so, you know, knowing the appropriate people on that front, even when you're dealing with, you know, companies within the Disney, Hulu, Searchlight, Nat Geo universe, you know, there's a little bit of understanding who is the film really appropriate for within that world, because ultimately, you know, the film could be could end up on Hulu, but in terms of who's handling the release, maybe it is more of a Searchlight or more of a 20th Century Fox, because they're more of the experts in terms of handling the release and the marketing. And ultimately, yes, it will be streaming on a dedicated platform. But in terms of, you know, making sure that the project, the film, has the ability to be seen and not just put up on the platform, I think is something you want to make sure of as well. I mean, that was a big conversation around Summer of Soul, where, you know, figuring out exactly who within that Disney universe were the appropriate ones to release it, and ultimately it is being released through Searchlight and will be on Hulu. So that's a sort of thing to navigate more and more these days with these companies in terms of you know, who are the actual individuals and teams that are handling the film.
Right, and also once it is acquired, you know, it is I wouldn't say doing battle, but has to share space in a way, if only in terms of the little thumbnails on the screen, with franchise content, and sometimes big, powerful, Marvel-powered, you know, franchise content. So, you know, it's just looking, I guess, for a new place, a new way in. Yeah.
Well, I think a
Anybody else
lot
have
of
thoughts?
this, I see that a lot of this is, you're completely right. A lot of these places, these new platforms are just staffing up, like Peacock. But what they're doing is they're just migrating their executives over from different cable channels and putting them in. So really, it's the same old situation. You think it's a brand new world of innovation and opportunity. It isn't. They're just the same old executives with the same old brief, looking for but except it's a worse deal than you had before, because it's all the world in perpetuity, no back end. And then you're just shoved, like I love Paramount Plus's tagline, a mountain of content. You're just there, shoved into a mountain of content, or an ocean of Netflix. I think it's a very challenging time, but that's why I'm such a passionate advocate for a sort of more punk-based, do-it-yourself, independent approach, because I think what's happening and what's getting all the headlines is this massive conglomeration process. And I do think it's very hard if you're an innovative producer or a director or someone with a unique story to tell. I think it's very hard to find your way amidst those massive entities consolidating and conglomerating and looking at their algorithms and always trying to find a way to be completely risk averse. It's like, how is anything ever going to rise up to the surface? It's quite hard. And I think, case in point, I think that I personally, just speaking personally, as opposed to looking at the data, I would say that one of the most singular successes of this environment in the big boys terms is the MCU, and the way they've been rolling out all these different series. But that is a massive undertaking. That is an entire ecosphere, and I think it's, if you're a producer or a storyteller, it's hard to, unless you're going to sign up and be a director for the MCU, it's a tough space right now, I think.
Yeah. Or if you have a project that is a traditional film in that it exists, it begins, it has a middle, and it ends, but it isn't franchisable. It isn't a whole world. You haven't created, 7 generations of origin story, I wonder, to what extent it literally affects writers, feeling like, well, I can't sell what I used to be able to sell. I can't just sell a good movie. I have to have this thing that fits into, somehow lends itself to the idea of a franchise. But, Alexis, there are some ways around that, right? I mean, in finding a place for your project that these entities can find a place to put it, create a festival for that's a certain topic. That's one door that has opened a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think, the other question is, what do you want out of the process of releasing your film? Is it, to reach as many people as possible? Is it to make as much money as possible? Is it, for awards and acclaim? You think about Nomadland, that is not a franchisable film,
right?
But but
no sequel that we can imagine,
right?
Yeah.
But I think people had the expectation and hope that it would go the route that it did, and there are certain distributors who are very good at working the awards campaign and building a film's release through press and acclaim and awards. So I think it's also about, really, especially when you're thinking about selling, understanding what you want out of the process. If it's just to get your film made, sure. If you want to, be able to have a little bit of press attention, maybe go to a festival so that you can hopefully, get your next job or get your next film greenlit. I think it's just a matter of understanding what your priorities are in the process. And I think festivals, each festival is different, and they each have their own sort of pros and cons in playing certain films, whether it's Sundance being more of a discovery for new filmmakers, or Telluride being a huge, awards launch. I think they still very much are they serve a role for sure, in terms of helping give validation to certain films and filmmakers. And I think the thing that I'm, again, just looking out for is making sure that new filmmakers, new talent still have the ability to make use of that platform.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think, you know, there have been a lot of announcements recently of streamers who are creating new initiatives, workshops, labs, et cetera, to reach emerging talent. So it feels a little bit like they're trying to bypass the festivals and create their own pipeline.
Yeah.
Which again, we'll see what that means. But I think it's interesting that they are very much trying to create their own ecosystem within their own walls.
Yeah, well, you know, there are certain recent examples of, you know, Michaela Cole turning down Netflix $1 million offer for ownership of I May Destroy You, with just that sense of here's Netflix that taps, as we hear, new talent, lets them do their thing, but certainly a fear that these entities will start literally sort of, you know, taking pen to paper, if you will. On the one hand, it's great because they can sort of create virtual festivals, as many of, you know, the live festivals had to do during the pandemic. It's an option later is, hey, this is a great hit film. I love Nomadland. What else has Chloe Zhao done? It can all be there. I can hit all these buttons and see all her films, you know, today if I want to. But yeah, I mean, I guess if it really changes the script, is that the big fear here, or the big risk? And again, for people who are trying to sell content, just will we miss somebody great in this process?
I think there's enough competition in the space generally that if you are not getting what you want from a deal with like a Netflix or an HBO or something like that, all the new entrants in the space and those that are looking to try to compete in it, you know, use the fact that you have scarcity on your side, a really great piece of content that clearly has an audience, that's clearly original, that is going to drive eyeballs. Somebody is going to give you something that more closely resembles the deal that you want. You do not have to sign your life away, the back end of a film away, you know, entirely. But I also think that, you know, when we hear from independent filmmakers, and we've been releasing independent films, you know, since I started 7 years ago, we find that filmmakers, their objective is to be seen by as many people as possible. And you know, Netflix unveiled this top 10 thing, right? And it's such an honor to be part of the top 10, but that doesn't actually get you anything except the eyeballs, and it's great. Netflix has in excess of 200 million subscribers. Like, that's amazing. That was impressive a couple of years ago. But if you take stock of all the other streaming platforms that are out there, including the new ad-supported ones, you can very well exceed that number. So it's about being with, I think there's a lot to be said about being with a distributor that can actually guarantee you the platform that can guarantee you a lot of eyeballs, and maybe might not even necessarily lock you down to one single platform with a finite audience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jeff, you had, when you were talking about the AVOD space, it's something that I've been hearing along the way, that particularly during the pandemic when we were all so news obsessed, that I loved your phrase fast network, because that people are they want to get everything in one place. And now that includes news. It includes, you know, that people are experimenting with models where, yes, you have all this content and you have news and you have weather, you know, very specific weather, et cetera, all at, you know, pushing just one button, if you will. Yeah. Are we just back to networks?
Well, if you think about it,
networks.
It's just another version of what traditional networks have been. I mean, you go on a platform, you have 200 channels on Pluto, and you have news, you have animation, you have movies, you have sci-fi thrillers. It's all in one location. But I mean, very much is what you know, traditional old network television was, when it was just television and then we had cable. So it's just a rebirth of the same model is what we're seeing. Except now you have a bunch of fast networks. Like, where do you go? One of the things,
where do you go?
standpoint. Like when we're distributing content, the marketing challenge is, okay, who am I telling, where am I sending people to, or am I just sending people everywhere? So that's one of the things in terms of finding and directing people to the audience. So what we found is that versus trying to push people to the platform is reverse engineering and marketing inside the platform where we already know there's an audience. So we already know that Roku has 55 million people subscribers, or Amazon Fire, or, you know, Tubi has a certain amount of subscribers. So we're kind of marketing to the people who are already subscribing versus trying to push new people to different platforms. And
I see.
That's worked very well for us.
I see. What about, and this is one thing that certainly has been part of the network model forever, is, you know, news at 6, then you have your prime time, and then you have your late night talk or whatever. And a certain amount of that isn't just library type content or, you know, a new movie or whatever. Is that moving into the streaming space as well? You know, again, creating entities that you get all this great new fascinating content, but you're also getting that sort of live at 5 kind of feeling about there's a news show. There's a, you know, I want to know the weather on my street, not, you know, I know Byron Allen has recently announced I'm going to go into a streaming service that gives you all that. So, you know, is that
you have the linear feeds that are on all these platforms. You know, the question is, it's hard for me to say, is somebody tuning in on one of these platforms at 5 o'clock to watch that news versus catching up? But they are, you know, there are programming in, like, you know, 24-hour news feed channels. It's hard. It's really, it seems to be more of a lean back experience. I don't know that somebody's going to one of these fast ones because they need to catch the news at 5 o'clock versus traditional news. I mean, it's like we don't have enough data to know how they're interacting when it comes to live news and live events. But all these platforms do have live feeds and live feeds.
I know. I was just going to add, I think it's interesting also how a lot of the streamers are experimenting with when and how they do release new shows, particularly with series. You know, Disney just made an announcement that they're going to release, you know, the new episodes on Wednesdays instead of, I forget what it was beforehand, but definitely trying to create a sense of like encouraging people to tune in or at least sort of encourage people to continue watching over several weeks versus just binging. And I think, you know, there are certain shows that do hit, whether it's, you know, something like Mayor of Easttown where everyone's, you know, wanting to know what happened next and we're talking about it in social media. But I do find it interesting the different ways they've experimented with that. You know, HBO Max releasing 2 episodes every week versus 1 episode every week, and all the different ways that people are playing with that, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, so it's stay tuned for the next 3 as opposed to stay tuned for the next 1. Yeah.
Just going back to the FAST thing for a second. You know, the way that FAST is represented is sort of that linear programming guide. It's like the TV guide channel. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of people really adopt to it very easily because, you know, my generation and all the generations, you know, before myself recognize FAST as free television in the way that we've always enjoyed it. And we ask ourselves, wait, why do we need cable anymore? We've got all these channels. We've got live news. You know, it resembles something that's always been integral in our lives. For Gen Z and millennials that might be a little less familiar or dependent on live television, they're experiencing or rediscovering the joy of, oh my gosh, I don't have to make a choice. I don't have to be scrolling Amazon Prime for 3 hours trying to find something that I want. It's passive. It's enjoyable. What FAST has also done is it's allowed entrepreneurial companies like FilmRise, like Laugh Out Loud, to kind of penetrate a fake spectrum that exists in digital that has a much lower bar to try to get onto the spectrum, to say, get out of the way, MSNBC and ESPN. We have space at the table too. So it's a reshuffling of the deck of what people consider to be a channel guide, and gives, you know, smaller and more, you know, sort of forward-thinking companies an opportunity to build a relationship with consumers. A live component is becoming, and a true live programmed component is going to become increasingly important as people build a relationship with channels and know that, okay, on Saturday mornings on this channel, I can watch The Twilight Zone or cartoons in the same way that we used to, back when live TV was the only thing to do. Sports, which must be experienced live, drive advertising dollars, which is powering the entire ad-supported streaming space. So I think we're going to see more competition for news channel and further proliferation of that carriage, but also the Rokus of this world and others that are owned by conglomerates. Amazon, a lot of them are already competing for live sports rights, and we're going to start to see them become more competitive against network television and cable television for those rights, because that is worth serious dough.
Well, I just wanted to, again, since we have a few minutes left, we could talk about this stuff all day, but just kind of once again do that sort of round the room and see if there's any final words, anything that you feel like we haven't brought up, or anything that you'd sort of like to leave us with as we think about this Wild West of streaming. And I'll start with Alexis again. It just depends on where you are on my screen, but that's the way we'll go.
So many thoughts. I think it's definitely a boom right now with so many different players. I think it's just we'll see if there's more consolidation. And I think the real challenge is going to be making sure that the new exciting independent voices are going to be able to build careers. I think so much. I'm not worried about the established award-winning filmmakers and producers who already have their track record and already have their box office reports to justify their budgets and their paychecks. I'm more wondering who is going to be the next Martin Scorsese, who is going to be the next, and what is the way to properly launch their careers and make their career sustainable given where streaming is right now. I'm hoping that, competition will encourage more reporting. We see a lot of reporting when it's really good news, or a really nice surprise of how many people have watched Queen's Gambit or something like that.
Yeah.
But I hope that more competition on streaming will make the streamers more transparent about the numbers and just, again, make everyone a little bit smarter in their deal making with streamers. But again, we'll see if that happens, especially since more consolidation is always possible.
Right. Well, let's pop over to you, Fenton. I mean, certainly, Drag Race has globalized, and streaming has helped it do it. But you also seem to have some thoughts about, some definite pros, but also some definite cons to all of what's happening out there.
Well, I think more consolidation is absolutely. It's just going to go on consolidating, probably ad infinitum. But I don't think that's kind of what we're talking about here. I think we're talking much more about how do independent producers and how does new talent and innovative voices get heard. I don't think it's through that process of consolidation. I think it's you see, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been talking about news and sports, scripted, unscripted, and also feature films. And I would say all of that stuff is just disappearing into this giant hole of these massive entities. Right. And while that's happening over there, I think the opportunity for independent spirits is to be their own streamer and to do their own thing. I just always have come, I guess, from a punk place of just do it. And I think that's why we launched our own subscription network, and it's doing great. And we're sort of, World of Wonder has its own DNA, I guess, and we're just beavering away, making as much as we can, not as much money as we can, making as much content as we can, and sort of remaining true to what interests us and excites us. And I think it's a tough environment if you're trying to fit into this other weird process that's going on sort of billion-dollar companies merging and blah blah blahing. But I think the real opportunity is on the edges, and which is actually, when you think about it, where they've always been. You know,
Sure.
And it's really no different now than it was then. It's just the opportunities are in different places, but they're still on the margins, I think.
There you go. Max, what do you think?
I agree a lot with
famous last words. Yeah.
Sure. I agree a lot with what Fenton just said, actually. I think that, if you're a producer, it's extremely important to take an objective perspective and know what platforms, whether it's big or small, is going to get behind your content to ensure that it isn't lost in the mix, right? Because platforms, as they are marketing themselves to consumers, it's all about, we have all this stuff that you're absolutely going to love. Well, that's great, all of that stuff, but what are you actually giving to me that I specifically care about? And I think that's why I'm not going to use the word niche, the vertical focus services actually have a wonderful chance to be a part of a user's regular bill, or as part of their content, the thing that lives on their smart TV, an app, the suite of apps that they regularly use, because it's an audience that, or it's a kind of content they really, would care about. So they should, producers should understand what platform or platforms are the most well suited for their content, and then it's going to actually get behind them and support them, because you're dead if you disappear.
Yeah, sure.
That's it.
And Jeff, some final words for us?
I would just say, I think it's a great time for filmmakers and producers of content, whether you're producing your own content or, like Fenton said, I think the opportunities to create and build your own networks it's never been so available for independent producers to kind of move into the space, because always the studios and networks have had a lock on distribution. I have this saying that, they talk about content is king. If content is king, distribution is emperor. That's kind of how I look at it. Is that now can be your own distributor of, like, we talk about niche, or whether it's, you call it vertical, but you can create your own networks and find your audiences. They are there. And the entry point is a lot easier than it has been probably in the last 15 or 20 years for independents to do it.
Sure. And again, at least when it comes to TV, yes, we have companies merging, but on the other hand, we don't have just 3 networks anymore. So, it's broadened in another way to maybe make up for that change.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been really enjoyable, and I hope you'll join us again for another one of our panels in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Fenton, Jeff, Max, and Alexis. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Plus, a big shout out to our sponsor, FilmRise. You can go back and rewatch this conversation on our event website at the link below. Thanks so much. We'll see you at the next panel starting shortly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Basinger, Senior TV Reporter for TheWrap, and welcome back to TheGrill, Focus on Streaming, presented by FilmRise. During this conversation, platform perspective, streamer strategies in a competitive marketplace, I'll be speaking with top streaming companies about evolving trends in the future of the industry. Throughout the conversation, we invite you to share your thoughts on social media with the hashtag TheGrill and follow us at TheWrap and on our Facebook page. Now, without further ado, let's bring out our panelists. Byron Allen is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Allen Media Group and Entertainment Studios. In 2016, Entertainment Studios purchased TheGrill, a video-centric news community platform featuring African-American focused content. Most recently, Byron has expanded his ad-supported streaming service, Local Now, as well as Pattern, a sister platform to the Weather Channel, which he bought in 2018. Byron will be joining us a little later in the conversation. Trey Durst is the Vice President of Digital Content Programming for FilmRise. He has cultivated an expertise in the emerging FAST channel marketplace by overseeing the growth of FilmRise's portfolio of digital linear channels. Rob Holmes is the Vice President of Programming at Roku, where he oversees the development and growth of the Roku channel, a leading free ad-supported streaming service on the platform, as well as the overall programming strategy for America's #1 TV streaming platform. Pato Spagnoletto is the Global Chief Marketing Officer for Discovery's direct-to-consumer business, where he is responsible for subscriber acquisition, retention, and growth, media and analytics, brand awareness, marketing, creative development and strategy, and consumer insights. Prior to this role, Pato was the head of marketing for Hulu. Thanks everyone for being here, really appreciate it. I wanted to start off with a group question. With the recent merger between Discovery and Warner Media, and also Amazon's purchase of MGM, I wanted to ask you all first, how important do you think scale is to success in streaming?
I feel like I should probably take that since we are part of that news. Look, obviously I can't comment on the merger itself, but generally speaking, scale I think is extremely important. It's important for two reasons, I would say. First and foremost is consumers right now are being bombarded with options. There are literally hundreds of services. And when you look at the average research saying that a consumer is willing to sign up for 3, 4, maybe even 5 services, it's still a hard task. And so that scale gives services, I think, an advantage or a reason for a consumer to choose you. And scale is really measured by the content offering and the product offering. So I think that's number one. And number two is, look, this is not a cheap industry. If you think about the costs of the content, the marketing and everything behind it, the reality is, you know, if I was a startup today, I probably wouldn't come into this industry given that the startup costs are just so significant. So, you know, we are lucky just even as an independent company today as Discovery to be able to play in the space. But my guess is we'll see more of these in the future as companies consolidate and look to get to that scale.
One other element to add to that is, you know, I think from the consumer standpoint, a little bit to what Pato was just saying, like this is great overall in terms of there just being like the best content being brought to the streaming platforms and to Roku. You know, Roku is the #1 TV streaming platform with over 50 million active accounts. And so to be able to sort of bring all this great content that these different companies are to the streaming world, I think is just overall really great evolution and just part of the transition towards streaming overall. And so I think as these services evolve, there is going to be a question of consumer choice. You know, one of the things we do is really help users to find great content, and that's within the subscription realm. You know, we also really believe in the ad-supported side of things and being able to make that content easy to use and give consumers great choice. And so that's one of the things that Roku Channel has been great at over time, is providing a really large selection of free content to users. So as these various other services scale up and sort of change their offerings, great opportunity for consumers, great to have all this choice, but they're also going to be pairing their SVOD subscriptions with AVOD options as well. And so, you know, we're looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, I also think about scale as like a volume of content for users to retain and stay on these platforms. I think we're all kind of seeing this from different angles. Roku has the ability to aggregate all this content to make that user experience and choice easier. Discovery has all this great IP and has a really great original draw for audiences, but then you have to have the content that keeps people on the platform while things are being produced. And I think where FilmRise comes in is this expertise at identifying that content that keeps people on the service. So I think we're all coming at this from very different angles and we all work together in different ways. So it's very complementary.
And Trey, I wanted to follow up with that. You know, what are you guys seeing for how, you know, your content is playing across like different platforms?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about FilmRise is we get to kind of sit here and watch how our content is being used across all these different platforms. And I think it's very complementary in ways with user retention. So I think it really depends on the different platforms' goals. You know, whether it's a fast versus a VOD experience, whether there's a certain age or genre being targeted. What we do is we take that from our massive library, narrow it down, and curate things based on performance, what we're seeing throughout the ecosystem. So working with everybody ends up being complementary to everybody else that we work with, just from all the information that we're able to obtain from that.
And Rob, obviously, you know, the big thing in your world is the debut of the former Quibi, original series, and obviously it's been very, very successful for Roku. So just kind of, go into how having original content is playing into like Roku's future?
Sure. Yeah, and glad to be here, Tim. Thanks for the question. I mean, I think one of the things we've been really pleased with is the early success that we're seeing, and we shared some numbers last week. We always knew that this was great content, but it drove a record period for us with respect to the Roku channel. We had more unique accounts streaming the Roku channel than ever before. All of the top 10 shows on the Roku channel were Roku originals. Really broad set of users were sampling this. About 1 out of 3 TRC viewers was watching one of the Roku originals. One of my favorite quotes from the coverage talked about how these weren't idle clicks. We had people watching 9 episodes on average. And sort of in aggregate, this content found, a bigger audience than it ever found before, just in this early debut period in the Roku channel. So we're really excited by that performance that we're seeing. And in terms of going forward, we always seek to bring great content to users through the Roku channel. It's free is a great part of the streaming experience. Obviously, there's lots of great SVOD subscription options, but free is really important to a lot of consumers because it's critical to them saving money in this decision to cut the cord. And so the more that we can make that content easy to find, we think that's just a great benefit for our users. So today we work with 175 different partners. We work with FilmRise, we work with Discovery to bring that content into the Roku channel to make it easy to find. And the Roku Originals is really something that we're adding on top of that. So I think we're going to be pretty thoughtful in how we move forward with additional originals and sort of the concept overall. One of the ones we've already decided to move forward again on is Die Hard. So that had a record-breaking opening for us on the channel, just in terms of the number of households that were engaging with the content. So it was a really easy decision for us to move forward with a season 2 there. And we're looking at others and sort of evaluating, but we're definitely open to doing more, kind of fitting in with that overall portfolio of content that we offer. But we think being able to offer the sort of additional Roku originals or building on what we're learning through this process is definitely going to be additive to the Roku channel experience over time.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious because you mentioned, people seems like they're watching 9 episodes at a time. How are people viewing, these Roku originals? Because obviously they were designed for a very different kind of viewing experience when they first kind of rolled out on Quibi. So what are you seeing by how people are actually consuming all these shows that you're offering?
Yeah, so if you spend time with the content, I think there was sort of a sense of what it was, of what it was meant to be. And I think when we spent time with it, we realized it was just great content. These were, effectively TV shows and movies that had been segmented into smaller segments. And so one of the things that we saw early on was that would make for great ad-supported viewing. If you think about the sort of nature of an ad break, it's this pause in the action, and you want the consumer to watch through the ads and come back and keep watching. So to have this structure where you have these segments that have this really propulsive kind of drive to get you to come back. They have a lot of cliffhangers and a lot of things that push you to come back after the ad break. We were really excited about that. And so by seeing this sort of extensive engagement where people are sticking around for, as I talked about, 9 episodes on average, we know that they're really connecting with the content and engaging in a long-term way, and being able to also be kind of watching through the ad breaks, which is critical for us with respect to our advertising partners. And so one of the things that the Roku channel really does is allow our advertising partners to connect with users on the Roku platform in a really scalable fashion. And we're seeing that the Roku channel content or the Roku Originals content is really able to assist with that.
Hey, Brian, welcome. How's it going?
It's going great. Good to see you, Tim.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for joining us. You're joining a pretty lively conversation about streaming and the future of streaming and where this industry is going. So actually, now that you're here, I'll get to the question I really wanted to ask you was, you guys launched Local Now in April. So I'm assuming it's doing pretty well in the first few months. It's been live, but that leads me to a question I want to ask is local TV sort of like the next frontier in streaming? Because it seems like that might be the last kind of like untapped marketplace for the streaming industry.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. When I bought the Weather Channel in March of 2018, and I went to Atlanta to get the new owner's presentation, they said, oh, by the way, you own the equivalent of a fully distributed broadcast network. And it is very unique, and it uses proprietary software and artificial intelligence to curate, aggregate, produce local news, weather, sports, and traffic, and stream it to the end user geofence to their zip code. And I went, whoa, are you serious? They said, yeah. They said, do not get too excited. I go, why not? And they said it loses well over 25 million a year. and I said, you know what? I said, I'm disappointed I didn't come up with the idea, but I'm certainly not dumb enough to shut it down. So over about a 3-year period, a little over 3 years, I invested a little over 100 million of my personal capital to reposition the asset. And what I said to them is, I said, you're trying to do this as an SVOD, and I don't think we can get Rob to pay $4.99 a month for this. And I said, you know what? I said, maybe what we should do is we should make it an AVOD, and we should add a lot more content, and let's make it free, which is everybody's favorite price. And so over the last 3 years, we repositioned the asset, and we added nearly 10,000 titles, movies, TV shows, documentaries, and over 300 channels. So, Bloomberg has a channel there, Kevin Hart has a channel there, Johnny Carson, People Magazine. And I said, let's just make it free, and let's just do for lack of a better way of saying it, a curated YouTube, where, everything is professionally produced and curated, you know what it is. And let's really lean in on something that others don't have, which is super hyper localization. And when we can now, people wanted to know about COVID-19 in their zip code. Obviously, they wanted to know what was going on around the world and in the country, but they really wanted to know what was happening in their zip code. So we really leaned in there, and we believe that that's a way for us to differentiate ourselves. We think that the streaming wars, localization will have a huge impact on who ultimately wins the AVOD streaming wars, because people do want, as a matter of survival, their local news, weather, sports, and traffic, because you need to know that before you walk out the door and what's happening in your zip code.
And Pato, I wanted to go back to you because Discovery Plus is it's one of the newer entrants in streaming. You guys only launched in January. So in your first, 6 months live, what have you guys noticed about how the audience, what they're consuming on Discovery Plus versus like your Discovery's linear channels?
Yeah, look, it's been fascinating, and I've been at Discovery now for a little over 3 months, so I'm halfway of the life of the half of the life. Couple things. One is just the audience itself. There is a fairly equal split between, the cord plusers, so people who have a linear subscription, and the people who don't. So for us, it's really interesting because for the cord plusers and how they behave and how they rate the product is different, because they're looking for like the definition of the plus. What am I getting here that I'm not getting on my linear channels? Whereas on the cord cutters or cord nevers, it's all new, right? So they come in and they're like, oh my gosh, this love it or list it, or this, Chip and Joanna, like, this is all new. This is great. So from a marketing perspective, it's good to understand how these two audiences value the service and how they interact with it. But the one thing that's in common is they are devouring the content. Look, our content is, we just went through a brand exercise, and, to put it into a punchline, it's full of life, for better, for worse. It's real people going through real things, and people appreciate that. It's, sometimes people think of it as a guilty pleasure. I'm like, there's nothing guilty about it. It's just fun to watch, and they watch it in droves. And by droves, I mean like literally 2 to 3 hours per day, which is a really high volume of consumption on this content. So for us, it's just fascinating to see not only what they watch, but in what bite sizes, what do they watch next? Where do they watch it? These are all insights that, you just wouldn't be able to have on the linear side. But by the way, informs right back into what we do from a linear strategy perspective. So having this multi-channel strategy now has given us more data and more just color on how consumers like our content. And it helps us understand how to market it, what new content to acquire or to create. And look, the last piece that I'll say, and this was a page from Hulu as well, is the beauty of an SVOD service, or just a streaming service for that matter. You don't have to get it right the first time. We've had a couple of titles that we've launched, and we're like, really thought this would do better. And when you look at the data, you quickly understand that you may have maybe messaged it or had a different creative approach. than the people who are actually viewing it. So you can take a second bite of the apple and go back out and re-promote it and merchandise it because it's new to most people. It doesn't matter. Like there's no such thing as an air date. It's just new to you. And so that's the new piece for us that we keep going back to. And it's just a lot of fun to kind of learn from our consumers and fine tune how we market both the service, but the content inside of it too.
Yeah, and you know, on the other end, ad-supported free streaming or FAST, you know, as you guys are well aware of, it's been on a major growth spurt, you know, over the last few years. You know, where do you ultimately see that business going? And in terms of, you know, how can it or how will it sort of compete with sort of the, you know, premium pay subscription streaming services?
Look, I think the two will coexist even within the same companies. It's just different business models where you go for reach and an ad monetization strategy, or you go for margin and ARPU through a subscription revenue. But the two are not mutually exclusive. You know, it's really about giving consumer the choice and the value exchange. If I can't afford a $10 service, but I can afford a $4 with a few ads, I'll choose that. And you know what? It's the consumer's rights to have that. I think it's our job to understand what it is that consumers want and to package it the right way. And look, at the end of the day, we're not for profits, we're for profits. So we also have to figure out what's right for the business, and that's the part that people don't like to talk as much about, but it's the reality behind it.
Yeah, look, I think on FAST overall, one of the interesting things that, you know, probably one of the themes of streaming was, oh, linear is dead, right? Everyone's moving on demand, and so streaming is just a migration to on demand. And I think one of the things we've seen over the last year or two is that's really not the case. I think there are these different consumer need states and use cases. And so obviously having some, you know, big, bold SVOD premiere is a reason for people to kind of come and show up and like make time to watch that show, that movie. But a lot of times when people turn on TV, you know, they're really just turning on the TV to watch something. And I think that's what FAST and the sort of ad-supported streaming is great for, is for that moment where someone is just, you know, kind of they're looking to engage in something, but they're not necessarily as specific about what it is. There's a little less intentionality there. And so that's where I think we've seen a lot of the growth in FAST overall. And, you know, around other verticals as well. Byron talked about local news. I think we saw some of the same stuff around national news. You know, in the last election cycle, we had over 20 million streamers engaging with the news hub with the Roku channel in terms of their desire to engage and understand all those different events, you know, the different elements that were going on there. Yeah, I think it just shows that people are really able to mix and match these great SVOD services with a really compelling and robust ad-supported solution, and FAST channels are just a big part of that.
Yeah, I think it's all additive, and it's a part of the landscape, and it's a rich landscape. Our data shows that 90% of the folks who use our app, they use it on their big screen TVs. So they're saying, hey, you know, this is something that's a part of the landscape with cable and broadcast and linear. So I think it's a great opportunity. Look, 100 years ago, I always say it was the Industrial Revolution, and what fueled that was gas and oil. And today it's the digital revolution, and what's fueling that is content, and the way we deliver it to them. And, you know, optionality is everything. And I think, you know, whether it's SVOD or AVOD or a combination of both, the consumer just has to have that optionality, and that's what they're gravitating towards. But I think in the AVOD space, you're going to see a lot of winners because the dollars that are being allocated to AVOD right now, we're probably, I don't know, about 26 billion or so. I think you'll blink and that'll be 100 billion. And so I think what you'll find is there's more money in the AVOD space than there is content to go up against it. And I think the SVOD space will do extremely well. People aren't going to disconnect. And I think people are really enjoying the optionality. And for that, we're getting more engagement. You know, I think they just recently came out and said there are more subscribers in America than people. So what's starting to happen now is, you know, we used to get paid once for the Weather Channel. Now we're getting paid 2 and 3 times for the Weather Channel by the same person because they have multiple subscriptions. So this is a digital revolution, and you can't have enough content because you have greater demand than the amount of content that's being produced. And one other footnote just to the content, I think the streaming platforms are excellent. My colleagues here, they do an amazing job. We're in business with a number of them. I think the real issue for us is going to be content, producing the content. The talent's getting really thin. You're talking about 50 billion a year being spent to produce, aggregate content that wasn't being spent just years ago. If you want a writer, a producer, a director, get in line and wait, until 2023, 2024. Some of these writer, producer, directors, and actors are tied up out to 23, 24. Some of them are extremely talented, and some of them you've never heard of. So we're the technology's great. The technology's fine. The engagement's there. The ad dollars are moving there. We're going to hit a wall on producing content consistently that the audience is going to care about, because we're getting backed up here on talent availability.
Yeah, I think also to speak to FAST, I think one of the things it solves is decision paralysis. We had this movement to the digital age where we have everything on demand at our fingertips, and then we spend like an hour scrolling and we don't know what we want to watch. And I think that it's this ability to just turn it on and see whatever content curated in the stream for you, to passively consume that. And now the next step being to keep that experience in one ecosystem. So if you want to turn on a TV passively, or you turn on FAST passively and you see Bob's Burgers on or whatever, you can stay within the same ecosystem and switch over to the VOD side of that. And that provides great data for advertising down to the local level even. And it's just a way of keeping that whole experience in one ecosystem for consumers. So for us, again, it's about, we know that we have content that people want to consume that retains attention. And it's really about getting people to turn it on. And once they're hooked, once they're on it, they'll be hooked. And if FAST solves that decision paralysis and brings them into experience, it's another avenue for us to reach the user.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that a little bit, we see the same thing in this ability to aggregate content, right? So, Trey talked about bringing it all into an experience. I think that's one of the things that the Roku platform is great for, because it has all this content available. But the Roku channel in particular is aggregating content from over 175 different partners in the linear FAST channels, in AVOD streaming, kids and family, premium subscription services. It's making it easier and easier for them to bring that viewing into that one single point. That's been very successful for us.
I will say, I think this is the biggest challenge, because you want to go watch Friends? Wait, where is Friends? Is that on HBO Max or Peacock? Or you want Seinfeld? I don't remember. And those are the known titles. Good luck to the unknown titles where you find through discovery and browsing, right? So I think this is actually where it's more difficult for the consumer today than it was in the past. And I think platforms like Roku have done a really good job of trying to bring that back together. Now in this ecosystem, everybody wants a piece of it, right? So, well, Roku, do you retain the data of this engagement? How do you make sure that my title gets surfaced, at the right point in time? Would I rather have that happen in my app? I think these are the questions that, honestly, all of us, I don't want to say struggle with, but are going after. The difference is this time is the consumer will tell us whether we're on the right path or not. Because if they don't have an easy experience, they're not going to find you and they're not going to consume you. So it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be really, really interesting for the next few years.
And just to add a little data to that, I mean, the Roku channel, we did earnings a couple weeks ago now, but in the first quarter, we doubled year over year in terms of both streaming hours and user reach. We're growing more than twice as fast as the platform. So to that point about just that we're going to learn from the consumer, the Roku channel has that accelerated growth rate over and above the platform. And that's one of the things that we take as a positive sign that this aggregation of content is really powerful for consumers.
Yeah, I think to the point too of looking for the Friends of the world and the Seinfeld of the world, I think a lot of that IP is kind of tied up, obviously, and there's a lot of fighting over that IP when there is a lot of content out there that we're able to access at this point. Historical content. I mean, for FilmRise, finding shows like The Rifleman, old westerns like that, and being able to take those series and bring them to audiences, I think that there's a lot of value in content that isn't known right now to the user, but once it's presented to the user, it hooks them on it. So I think that there's also this whole treasure trove with the digital age now, where we're going back and being able to reintroduce audiences to these really well-made shows, and especially keeping in mind things like day parting as well, where we want to make sure content is appropriate. Maybe a lot of content in the VOD side of things was not as appropriate for the abilities that has afforded us to make content, where now this content's very usable in like the fast world now when we go back to this old TV programming.
All content is new content because every day a new audience is born.
There you go. All right. So I will end with this last question about everybody's friend, the cable bundle. Because when streaming era first started, it was seen as a way for many consumers to break free of the bundle, that they didn't really like having to pay for all these channels they didn't really watch, didn't really want. But now that there's so many streaming services, between free ones, between pay ones, that's a lot of different people to have to give money to, or services have to sign up for individually. So how do you guys sort of see any kind of sort of rebundling or reforming of the bundle in a streaming world? How do you see that kind of playing out the next few years?
Our bosses, the audience, the consumer, will be very clear about what works for them, and they will tell us in real time. And it's this is one of the great things about this digital frontier. It's very efficient because our bosses tell us very quickly. And so I think that the way we've approached it, about 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, everybody was kind of cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs for .com. And I said, the human animal, we watch more than we read. And as human animals, we're going to use the internet for streaming, not reading. And so about a little over 15 years ago, I started buying up all the .tvs, because I said that kind of feels like it's streaming and it's saying streaming. And so that's why we own all of the premium .tvs, comedy.tv, pets.tv, cars.tv, sports.tv, news.tv. We bought them all. We bought all the beachfront digital real estate. Because what I envision as we chase 4 billion connected devices around the world is we will go direct to the consumer on their passion: comedy, cars, pets, recipes, sports. And if they decide to unbundle, they have that optionality to just have sports or comedy or news. So I think the audience will be there. That's the habit that they showed us with broadcast. And the way I see broadcast, the early days of broadcast and the human animal, 40s, 50s, 60s, ABC, NBC, CBS. Then you get into the 70s, the 80s, and 90s, and the early aughts. And then we became focused. And here's BET, MTV, Nickelodeon, Lifetime. I think you're going to start to see the same human animal behavior, that here's broadcast, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, so forth and so on. And then they're going to get focused. Who has my comedy? Who has my pets? Who has my recipes? And it will all live together. It will all live together in the same ecosystem. And you have enough customers. You have 4 billion of them who will make their choices: bundle, focus, semi-bundle. So I think there's more than enough, and I think everybody's going to do extremely well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, because I completely agree, is bundling in the new world looks really different, because there's 3 different dimensions of bundle. There's bundling of content, bundling of platforms, bundling from a pricing point. So what used to be really simple in the cable world is like, okay, I'll give you $100, but I get it all, and it's all in one place. Now there's just different dimensions to that. So I think the bundling strategy will be pulled by consumers, but either supported or resisted by, honestly, a lot of the people that are in this industry right now, who are going to try and create their own moats. And some of them will succeed just because of the scale, back to your first question. But I think at the end of the day, if we are truly doing what is best for the consumer, we'll put aside the platform discussion and really just create a single place where a consumer can easily consume and purchase content, because right now we're not there yet.
All right, guys, I think that's all the time we have. First off, really appreciate everyone joining. Thank you to Byron, Trey, Rob, and Pato, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Plus, a huge shout out to our sponsor, FilmRise. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
I think saying that COVID has killed movie theaters killed movie theaters. It's a shitty product.
Our theory is gaming is really social media now, like Facebook's cancer.
There are talented and qualified women, people of color, LGBTQ, and people with disabilities. Like, we've been here. All you need to do is hire us.
there always should have been a diversity of voices. I think the question is, can that be maintained?
I was lucky enough to get to know Steve Jobs in the years that I was at Pixar. We were talking about merchandise, and he said, "What's your sense of it?" And I said, "Well, how do you mean?" And he said, "My sense is fewer things, better things." And I thought, that's dead on. Dead on. And we could do that with the theatrical experience.
We're at an interesting time. And I think that we're all realizing that it's all necessary, the entertainment business. I don't think it's just one way anymore. I think we all have to appreciate and experience and try to find other ways of entertaining people.
I mean, we just launched a startup in a pandemic with a staff that's almost all moms with small kids who are homeschooling full time. If you can do that, you can do just about anything.
We didn't have to pivot, but we had to build the company from the beginning completely differently, from hiring people that I've never met in real life before to raising money like in just an incredibly difficult environment.
I went around to everyone in the music industry for 4 years, like concerts and video games. We're going to turn your artists to avatars. Some people thought I was crazy. And then this year, all of a sudden, everyone is emailing us and calling us up.